Hello friends. So in this video we are going to see about selection of appropriate research instrument or research tool for the particular study. So it is most important because in order to carry out any research, so research tool or instrument is the vital part which helps the researcher to proceed with the study further. It is like an woodcutter is having an axe and cutting the wood, and the tool what he is using to cut the wood is axe, and it depends on the type of axe he is using to cut the wood, whether it is sharp or whether it is lengthy or it is short. So accordingly he chooses and he succeeded in cutting the wood. Similarly, the researcher himself or herself has to choose the right instrument or the tool in order to collect the valid data from the respondents or the study participants, so the research outcomes or the end products will be very fruitful. So let us see what is a research instrument or tool is all about. A research instrument is a tool used to collect data relevant to the study that you are conducting, or you can say it is a good research instrument should be validated and it should be proven reliable, or anything that becomes a means of collecting information for your study is called a research tool. So it is nothing but in order to collect data which is relevant to the study, and you are going to use especially to collect the relevant and valid data from the study participants, or any instrument or tool you use but it gives some information about the participants, so you can say that is your research instrument or tool. So there are three different classifications are available, or you can classify the research instruments mainly into three. One is standardized research instrument, researcher made instrument, and the third one is modified standardized instrument. Let us see one by one. What is standardized research instrument? We know that we are aware about that there are many standardized forms of instruments available. Say for an example, in order to assess the pain level of the patient, so we have a pain scale, or if you want to assess the intelligence level of the human beings, we have a standardized tool for that. Similarly, we have many other instruments also to assess the other parameters or the variables of human beings. So an evaluation or measurement instrument that is valid, reliable, replicable without changes or adaptations in its structure and content in different populations with the similar characteristics. So it is nothing but the instrument, any number of time you use it is not going to lose its validity or reliability, and any number of time you repeat it, it's going to give the consistent result, and the tool is not going to be modified and it is not going for an adaptation stage also, because it is not going to change its original style and design even if you are applying the tool for the different populations with similar characteristics. So such a tools you can say as standardized research instruments. So these instruments are valuable research tools because they have been evaluated for validity and reliability with a large sample of participants. So it is already proven that the tool is valid and reliable because it has been already administered and tested among many number of participants they have undergone, and the instrument is already tested. Such an instruments you can say standardized research instruments. The second classification is about the researcher made instrument. So here the researcher himself or herself designing the tool for his or her research study in order to collect data when there are no existing instruments are available to carry out the study. So what the researcher does is he is looking for some instruments which is relevant to his or her study, but he is unable to find the best and the suitable research instrument. So finally he decides preparing the research tool or the instrument on his own. Okay, such an instruments are called researcher made instruments. So after designing or preparing the instrument, the prepared tool must undergo validity and reliability testing procedure, and it should be proven that the tool is reliable and valid to administer on the study participants. But the researcher is using the standardized instrument here, so there is no need of validity and the reliability testing procedure. It should not be repeated because it's already proven. Whereas in researcher made instrument, after designing, so it has to undergo these two procedures, validity and reliability testing. And the third one is about modified standardized research instrument. Here, the research instruments are an adapted instruments, which means the researcher is going to choose the standardized instrument and he is going to make some changes in the research instrument because completely he doesn't want the instrument to be used in his study. So he needs some modifications according to his study conveniences or to meet the purposes of his own study. He is making some changes in original research tool. Then the tool is or the tool becomes modified or altered. Okay, so in such cases, what he has to do is he has to do the validity and the reliability testing procedure since he has done some changes or modified, because this modification includes the researcher may be adding some content or deleting the items, or some of the sentences can be modified, or sometimes he is removing the portion of the original research instrument and adding his own section into that, but the original remains the same and the content is uh, modified or changed or altered. So in such cases, the new tool or the modified altered research tool has to be validated and the reliability testing should be done before it is administered on the samples. So these three are the classification of research instruments. Now, how to select most appropriate instrument from the existing tool. So we are aware about it. There are many pre-existing tools are available which is already prepared and conducted validity and reliability testing. It has been proven. So how we are going to choose as a researcher? So we have to conduct a very broad and thorough literature search to retrieve the instruments that assess the phenomenon in question. So review of literature is a vital aspect in any research. So it is a blueprint for your research aspects, we can say. It gives some ideas and suggestions in which tool you have to choose for your particular research study. So very broad and thorough literature search is important here, and identify all the available instruments to measure the phenomenon of interest. So once you start searching, you may get number of instruments which is related to your study, and you have to identify all those instruments and you see that which instrument is fitting perfectly to carry out your research study. And once it is identified, you have to reassess the course of development of the identified instrument. So it is important for the researcher to reassess, because if the instrument is developed a long back or long ago and maybe the characteristics of the population or the environment, so whatsoever some of the variables, if it is changed, because the gap between the development of the instrument and the present time, so these two distance or the difference the researcher has to understand, and whether it has any influences on the samples, that has to be assessed, right? Then finally select the instrument that meets the goal of your study. So if you're satisfied with the tool or the instrument, and if you feel that yes, if this instrument is sufficient to carry out my research, so you can go ahead with the selected pre-existing tool. And here we have some of the examples that the existing nursing research instruments. Here I have mentioned the most important three aspects. One is mental measurement yearbooks or MMYs. Currently there are 16 volumes, and the first volume was published in 1938 and the latest edition in 2005. So the specialty is the books are now published every 18 to 24 months. Okay, so these are the widely used research instruments, and the researcher can choose the required instrument from this among these 16 volumes. And the second is about a very useful source for the nurse researcher. It is Instruments for Clinical Healthcare Research. Again, it has 4 volumes, and this also provides most required instruments for the nurse researchers. And the third one is about health and psychosocial instruments. This is actually a database. So this database provides plenty of instruments. They're saying that around 15,000 instruments are available in the database. Okay, so these instruments are mainly covering um, the question is like questionnaire you can get, the interview, schedules, checklist, rating scales, projective techniques, vignettes, and scenarios. So these are the three major nursing research instruments which is currently available, and the researchers can utilize these areas. But we have to keep in mind some of the important points while choosing the pre-existing tools, because many of the existing instruments are copyrighted, right? And the copyright holder must be contacted to obtain permission to use such an instrument. And sometimes this permission is given without cost, and sometimes the researcher has to pay for permission to use the instrument or has to purchase copies of the tool. So in order to avoid the legal issues or the problems in future, so this is better to get the permission from the concerned copyright holder, and the tool can be uh, adapted or adopted. So those two things are possible. Now, what to do when there are no available instruments for measuring the phenomenon of interest? So in that case, what we have to do, review the research question and replace it with one that does not involve the assessment of the phenomenon for which there are no measurement tools available. So the only way is that the researcher has to revise or review the research question. He can modify it, and he can go for the variables which can be easily assessed by the existing tools which is available, or he can add some other things where the research tool is not important in order to carry out the research study. So such a modification the researchers can do if there are no pre-existing availables. Or another way is he has to develop his or her own research tool. Okay, so that comes under adopting or adapting research instrument. So when there are no pre-existing instruments are available, he is going for preparing the new one. But if you want to avail the existing research instrument, there are two processes. One is either you're adopting an instrument or adapting the instruments. So these two terms are most important in selecting the research instruments. What is adopting an instrument? Adopting an instrument is quite simple and requires very little effort, because you are going to do just copy paste, or just you're going to choose the instrument and you're not going to make any changes, or you're not going to alter the originality of the research instrument. So when the instrument is adopted, then the reliability and validity research studies that have been conducted on that instrument can be applied to your study as well. So there is no second time of conduction of this validity and reliability testing procedure. This is not all required, because this is already proven, and the proven things are applicable to your study also, because you are choosing the pre-existing tool for your study. So while you are using this instrument, or if it is adopted completely, and you have to describe the instrument appropriately in your research study, regarding who developed the instrument, who validated the instrument, and other studies that have used the instrument. These informations are mandatory. This has to be mentioned. And the second category is about adapting an instrument. So it requires more substantial changes than adopting an instrument, because here the researcher follows the general design of another instrument, but the researcher is adding the items or removing the items, and or substantially changes the content of each item. So what happens here, the tool is now modified or altered. So new reliability and validity testing will need to be conducted, and adapting an instrument is similar to developing a new instrument, because only the design will remain the same. Rest all will be modified or altered according to the study need of the researcher. Here comes developing an instrument. So when there are no pre-existing research instruments are available, the researcher himself decides, yes, let me prepare an instrument and use it for my study. So high quality research mandates that the instrument be developed professionally. The first step is to consider the population under study. So whenever you design your own instrument. You have to keep in mind for whom you are making the research study, because say for an example, if you are making the tool on motivation, whether you are checking for the school children or for the college level children. So in both category, the level of understanding will be different. So according to the age of the participants, this tool has to be designed. So population under study is most important when you are designing your own tool. Then reliability and validity testing need to be conducted. There is no change. And when you are designing your own tool, you should keep in mind there should be some key elements. Okay, like the clarity of the words which you are framing, and balance of the phrases, and length of the sentences you're using in your tool, and the comprehensiveness of your questions, and the constraints, responses, how you are going to get from your respondents, and the instructions or utility, how you instruct your candidates how they have to answer, and the placement or order of the questions, where you are going to place. For example, demographic data we are collecting from the samples, whether you are going to place this demographic data at the beginning of the questionnaire or at the end of the questionnaire. Similarly, or other questions also. So placing or ordering of the questions, it is most important because it enhances the validity of the data, because it encourages and motivates the participants to give accurate data for the study. Then the context or the of the questions, how you are going to make it. So these are the key elements of any data collection tool. If you are designing your own tool, you have to make sure that these key elements are covered. Next is about criteria for selection of a research instrument. How it should be. Suppose if you are choosing your research instrument, you have to look for the practicality of the instrument, validity of the instrument, and the reliability of the instruments. Either you are choosing from the pre-existing or you are designing your own tool. Make sure that these three criteria are fulfilled by your research instrument. Okay, practicality, validity of the instrument, and the reliability of the instrument. What is practicality of the instrument? It is nothing but its cost and appropriateness for the study population. It includes how much will the instrument cost, how long will it take to administer the instrument, will the population have the physical and mental stamina to complete the instrument, or special motor skills or language abilities required of subjects. Does the researcher require special training to administer or score the instrument? So these are the possibilities we have to look for. Whether your research instrument is fulfilling all these criteria, then it is called practicality of the instrument. And if you talk about the reliability of the instrument, it concerns its consistency and stability. Okay, reliability needs to be determined when whether the instrument is a mechanical device you are using, or you are using the questionnaire, or you are assigning a human observer to observe the behaviors of the common particular groups. The degree of reliability is usually determined by the use of correlational procedures, some statistical applications we have to do, and that gives the exact values of reliability. So the higher the correlation or coefficient, the more reliable is the instrument. And validity of the instrument is about the ability to gather the data that it is intended to gather, because the content of the instrument is of prime importance in validity testing. So the words which you are making, it is more important. Okay, that gives the validity of your instrument. So the greater the validity of an instrument, the more confidence you can have that the instrument will obtain data that will answer the research questions or test the research hypothesis. So validity of the instrument is nothing but the ability of the instrument which you are making, whether it is intended to gather, it gives the accurate or valid data or not. So it depends on how you are designing. Okay, the content is most important. Now some of the examples that research instruments used in qualitative research. If the researcher is carrying out the qualitative research, then he can use the research instruments like observation, interview method, focus group discussion, or document analysis. These four methods are applicable to the qualitative research designs. And the research instruments used in quantitative research. So if the study is quantitative research, then the researcher can use the research instruments. It can be a survey method, or it can be a questionnaire, or it can be a checklist, or it can be a test, or it can be a scales. Okay, so these are the appropriate research instruments the researcher can use in qualitative as well as quantitative research. In case if the researcher is carrying out mixed method research, then the mixing of these two designs or two methods can be applied in order to carry out the study. So this is all about selection of research instruments for different types of study and some of the most important aspects. So thank you so much.